Hi, my name's Rylan. I woke up in the ICU, unable to move, unable to speak, just the sound of machines keeping me alive. Then I heard him, my stepfather, whispering to the doctor, "I'm done wasting money. Pull the plug." And as the nurse reached for the tubes, I did the only thing I could. I whispered one word. She froze. And what happened next changed everything. Because sometimes, death isn't the worst betrayal, family is. The first thing I remember was the sound. A slow, steady beep cutting through a wall of black. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, sharp enough to remind me that I was still here, somewhere between this world and the next. I tried to move my fingers, but they wouldn't listen. My chest rose and fell like it belonged to someone else. The air was thick, humming with electricity and antiseptic. I didn't know where I was. Not at first. Then a voice, low, calm, too familiar, broke through the haze. "Remove support tomorrow." He's been unresponsive for weeks. That voice, Victor, my stepfather. Each word from him felt like a knife drawn slowly down my spine. He didn't sound sad. He sounded bored, like he was ordering lunch, not ending a life. Another voice, a woman's, soft and cautious. "Mr. Drayton, are you certain? The form requires family consent." Victor's tone didn't waver. "I'm the only family that matters now." Papers shuffled. "The insurance stops covering long-term care at midnight. Let's not drag this out." The machines kept beeping, one after another, each one marking the seconds I might not have left. I wanted to scream, to tear out every wire and tell them I was alive. But my body was a cage, heavy and cold. I could hear my own heartbeat slowing, like it was being smothered. Footsteps moved closer. Someone touched my wrist. Light, deliberate. The woman again. "His vitals are stable for now." Her name tag brushed against my arm as she leaned over me. The faint scent of coffee and lavender soap reached me. "Mara," I read in the blur of half-consciousness. "Nurse Mara." Then Victor's voice again, closer this time, right beside my ear. "You've cost me enough, Rylan. This family doesn't need another failure draining it." Something in me sparked, small, weak, but alive. He wasn't just letting me die. He wanted it. I tried to move. My throat burned. My tongue felt like stone. All that came out was a faint rasp, nothing human. Victor turned to the doctor. "You see, he's gone. Do it." Metal clinked. I felt the tube at my throat shift. Air caught, panic flaring in every nerve I still owned. "No, not like this." In the distance, I heard Mara hesitate. "Wait, his pupils." They reacted. "Muscle reflex," Victor said smoothly. "You're new. You'll learn not to read ghosts in a dying man." He stepped back, the soles of his polished shoes scraping against the tile. I heard the sound of pen on paper, a signature, my death warrant. And the tube began to loosen. And then, through the roaring in my head, through the pounding of blood in my ears, I forced a breath. It was jagged, wet, but it carried sound. "Mom," the word tore itself out of me. "He killed me." The room froze. The beeping jumped, sharp and wild. Papers fell. Mara's gasp was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. What did he just say?" Victor cursed under his breath. "You imagined it. Sedation can cause reflex speech." But Mara wasn't buying it. Her hand flew to the emergency call button. "Security to ICU 4, now." Victor moved fast. Too fast. I heard the scrape of his chair, the sound of something metallic hitting the floor. "You'll regret this," he hissed. His voice had lost that calm edge. Now it was trembling, angry. Mara's voice broke the panic. "Sir, please step back." "I said he's gone." "No, he isn't." Then the alarms began, a shrill, unending cry that filled the room. Red lights flashed against my eyelids. My lungs spasmed, fighting for air, and I felt a rush, oxygen, cold and burning as it hit me, hands pressed on my shoulder. Mara's voice, urgent, shaking. "Stay with me, Rylan. Do you hear me? Stay." Footsteps pounded down the hall. Doors slammed. Someone shouted for a crash cart. Through the noise, I heard Victor's shoes again, retreating, fast. The door opened, closed, gone. And just like that, everything went quiet except for the machines. The beeping steadied again, slow, patient, alive. My world dimmed at the edges, but before it slipped away completely, I heard Mara whisper beside me, her breath trembling. "Sir, stay with me. Who is he?" The machines answered for me. Beep, beep, steady as a heartbeat, until darkness folded over the rhythm of the machines faded into something softer, the sound of rain tapping against glass. It was steady, patient, as if the world outside was breathing with me. The darkness that had swallowed me earlier now thinned to a gray fog. Shapes moved beyond my eyelids. A hand adjusted the blanket over my chest, gentle and deliberate. Mara. I could tell by the way she breathed, careful not to disturb the silence. "You're safe," she whispered. Her voice was low, almost afraid of being heard. "I know you can hear me, Rylan. Blink once if you understand." For a second, I wasn't sure if my body would obey, but it did. My eyelids lifted, slow, deliberate, and then fell again, once. She caught it. I heard her inhale sharply, like she'd seen a ghost. "Good," she murmured. "That's our secret for now." She moved quietly around the room, checking monitors, writing something on a clipboard. I wanted to ask her what time it was, if Victor was gone, if anyone believed me. But I stayed still. The ventilator hummed beside me, and somewhere beyond the window, thunder rolled faintly. The rain picked up. It blurred the lights of the parking lot into silver streaks. Then the door clicked open. Heavy shoes, expensive leather, stepped in. Victor. Even without seeing him, I could feel the temperature drop. He didn't speak to me, of course. His voice aimed past me, cold and composed. "Mr. Phelps," he said, "we'll handle this quietly. The records need to show clear brain death. No ambiguity. You understand?" The name made my blood stir. Phelps, the hospital administrator. I'd seen him at fundraisers before, always smiling too wide, shaking Victor's hand like he was greeting a donor, not a man with a reputation for cutting corners. A pause, then Phelps spoke, cautious. "That's not how these things work, Mr. Drayton. We can't just—" Victor interrupted him. "You can, and you will. You have a family, don't you? College tuition, mortgages, insurance, things that can disappear overnight. Let's not pretend we're strangers to reality." I could hear the faint rustle of an envelope. "Make sure the report says the damage was irreversible. Nothing heroic, nothing messy, just the truth, as we'll define it." Phelps hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's highly irregular." Victor's tone hardened. "So is losing $1 million endowment if this leaks." Silence. Then footsteps retreating down the hall. Mara had stopped moving. She stood by the door, frozen. I could hear the faint buzz of her phone unlocking in her pocket. Then a soft click. The sound of recording. She shifted slightly, positioning herself near the crack of the half-closed door. Through the tiny space, Victor's voice drifted back, smooth again. "You have 24 hours. After that, I'll assume you've reconsidered your loyalty." The door shut. I wanted to open my eyes, to shout, to tell Mara to run, but something inside told me not yet. The safest move was silence. Let him believe I was still the corpse he wanted me to be. A few minutes passed, the rain softened. Mara turned off her phone screen and slipped it beneath the hem of her scrubs. Then she walked back to me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, jaw tight. She leaned over and spoke so quietly I almost thought I imagined it. "He's paying them to erase you." If I could have moved, I would have clenched my fists. Instead, I forced a single tear to form, a small proof of life. It slid slowly down my cheek, pooling near my ear. Mara looked at me, saw it, and her expression changed. Fear turned to resolve. "I've got it recorded," she whispered. "Every word. Don't react. Just stay like this. They can't know." She glanced toward the hallway again, then lifted the edge of my pillow. Her phone disappeared beneath it. The monitor beside me blinked steadily, indifferent to the storm both inside and outside the room. Victor's words echoed in my head. "You should have died with her. Her. My mother. The accident. The night everything broke." Outside, lightning flashed. The reflection of it flickered across the glass, a jagged reminder that truth has a way of finding light no matter how deep it's buried. Mara brushed the back of her hand against my wrist, pretending to check my pulse but really saying, "I'm here." Then she whispered, so soft it was almost lost to the rain, "If what he said is true, what really happened that night?" Her words still lingered in my mind. What really happened that night? As the rain outside the hospital faded into a steady hum. Somewhere between the rhythm of the storm and the quiet pulse of the monitor, my thoughts slipped backward to the one night I'd spent years trying to forget. It started simple, ordinary. The kind of night that doesn't warn you it's about to change everything. Mom and I were driving back from a small diner off Route 74. She loved that place, the kind of spot that still served pie on chipped plates and refilled your coffee before you could ask. The radio was playing an old Alan Jackson song, and she was humming along, tapping the steering wheel. "You know," she said, glancing at me, "I finally told Victor I'm done." I looked over, surprised. Her tone wasn't angry, just calm, like a woman who'd finally set down a heavy load. "You mean it?" She nodded, smiling softly. "Your mom's got one last chapter in her, kiddo. And this one's not going to have his name in it." The headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the dark, the road stretching empty ahead. I remember feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. For the first time in years, she looked like herself again. Free, lighter. We talked about everything and nothing. About her garden, about me maybe starting my own business again, about a beach trip when spring came. The kind of talk that makes you forget the bad years ever happened. Then came the sound, a faint pop, metal against metal. Mom frowned. "Did you hear?" Before she finished, the steering wheel jerked violently. The car fishtailed, tires screaming against wet asphalt. Headlights from an oncoming truck flashed, too bright to look at. Mom fought for control, both hands gripping the wheel, but the brakes gave nothing back. "Rylan, hold on!" I reached for her, the seatbelt cutting into my chest. The world turned white, then black, then a blur of spinning lights and the deafening crunch of glass. When the noise finally stopped, there was only rain and the smell of smoke. I couldn't move. My head throbbed, warm blood trickling down my neck. Somewhere beside me, Mom gasped. "Rylan." Her hand found mine, trembling. "Don't. Close your eyes." But everything was slipping. The next voice I heard didn't belong to her. "Don't bother," Victor said, his tone flat. "She's gone." I forced my eyes open. The world came back in broken flashes, red taillights glowing in the rain, the passenger door half crushed, Mom's face pale but moving barely. She wasn't gone. She was trying to speak. "Help her," I rasped. Victor stood outside the driver's side, his expensive coat soaked, his hair slicked back as if the storm itself avoided touching him. He looked at her, then at me, and sighed. "You're making this harder than it has to be." He reached in, brushed his hand over her still fingers, and then I saw it. Her wedding ring, glinting faintly under the flash of lightning slipping into his palm. "Victor," he didn't answer, didn't even look at me. He just stepped back, staring at the wreck like it was an inconvenience. Then he pulled out his phone and pressed a single button. But instead of dialing 911, he made another call. His tone was calm, casual. "It's done. Took longer than expected." I tried to move, but the pain anchored me. Rain poured through the shattered windshield, cold and merciless. Mom's breathing grew shallower. She tried to say something, maybe my name, but her voice broke halfway. I remember shouting, or maybe I just thought I did. "Call for help!" He didn't. Not for another half hour. By the time the sirens came, she was gone. And he stood there, arms folded, pretending to be the grieving husband. "She didn't suffer," he told the paramedics. It was quick. They believed him. Everyone did. But I saw the truth in the way his eyes met mine. Calm, steady, daring me to remember. Now, lying in the hospital bed weeks later, I could still feel that same cold rain soaking through my clothes. The sound of sirens then had become the sound of the monitor now. Same rhythm, same helplessness, except this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. The truth had waited long enough. I opened my eyes again, in the hospital, and realized the nightmare never ended. When I opened my eyes again, the light was softer, filtered through half-closed blinds. The sharp pain that used to grip my ribs had dulled to something manageable, like a bruise that refused to fade. 2 weeks had passed since the night Mara whispered those words, and the nightmare still hadn't loosened its grip. I could talk now, barely. My voice came out as a rasp, but it was enough for the detectives who stopped by. They came in pairs, always polite, always just following up. The latest one, Detective Carter, stood by the foot of my bed, tapping a pen against his notebook. He looked like the kind of man who'd seen too much, but still tried to sound patient. "Your stepfather's a respected man, son," he said, glancing at the chart near my bed. "War veteran, businessman, big donor to the hospital foundation. I've seen people like him get accused before. Grief does strange things to families." Grief. That word tasted bitter in my mouth. I swallowed carefully. "He told the doctors to pull the plug." Carter sighed. "That's not on record. According to what I've got here, the crash report says you fell asleep at the wheel. Driver fatigue. That sound familiar?" My pulse quickened. "That's not what happened." He shrugged. "Officer Lang signed it himself. He's a reliable man, been working with your stepfather's company for years. Community outreach or something. The file looks clean, Rylan." I turned my head toward the window. Outside, a storm was rolling in again, heavy clouds pressing low over Charlotte. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Clean." After he left, the silence settled like dust. The machines hummed beside me, counting each breath, each heartbeat that Victor hadn't been able to steal. It was past midnight when I heard soft footsteps. Mara. She'd started visiting at odd hours, slipping in when the floor was quiet, her hair tied up, her eyes alert but kind. She carried a folded piece of paper in her hand, tucked it under the edge of my tray, and whispered, "Don't open it yet." "What is it?" My voice was hoarse. "The hospital's original medical log," she said, scanning the hallway before sitting beside me. "The one before he ordered the change." I looked at her, confused. "Rylan," she continued, lowering her voice, "the toxicology report they submitted said you were intoxicated. It was false. This," she tapped the folded sheet, "shows your blood alcohol was 0, completely clean. It's time-stamped, before he had it replaced." I stared at the tray. The weight of that single page was heavier than my own body. "You shouldn't have this," I murmured. She smiled sadly. "I know." It hit me then, what she was risking. Victor wasn't the kind of man who left loose ends. I'd seen what he could do to people who got in his way, how easily he twisted truth into something unrecognizable, and now she was right in the middle of it. "Mara, you can't—" The phone on the wall rang, cutting me off. 3 short, deliberate tones. She froze. I watched as she lifted the receiver, her hand trembling slightly. "ICU 7, she said softly. There was a pause. Her expression changed. Whatever voice was on the other end, it made her color drain. Then she lowered the phone and whispered, "It was him." "Victor?" She nodded. He said, "Tell that nurse to stay out of things she doesn't understand." Then he hung up. The room seemed smaller suddenly, every sound magnified, the hum of the lights, the rain outside, the faint creak of the IV stand. I could feel the pressure of his reach pressing in, even here, where I was supposed to be safe. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale. "He's watching us." Mara's eyes met mine. "Then we stay ahead of him." She reached into her pocket, took back the paper, and tore off a corner with the hospital timestamp before folding the rest into her bag. "If we can't trust the police yet," she said, her voice steady now, "we find someone else. Someone who owes your mother the truth." I studied her for a long moment. The rain streaked the window, each drop tracing its own path down the glass. "Then we start with what she left behind." Mara nodded once. Her hand disappeared into her bag again, pulling out something small and black. "She did leave something," she said quietly. "And it's time you saw it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive, the one with my mother's initials scratched on it. The flash drive felt heavier than it should have, like a small piece of metal carrying an entire lifetime's worth of secrets. Mara placed it gently in my palm, her eyes searching mine as if to ask whether I was ready. The truth was, I wasn't. But I'd already learned that readiness doesn't matter when the past comes knocking. That night, the hospital corridors were quiet except for the low hum of machines and the shuffle of nurses' shoes echoing down the hall. Rain pressed against the windows again, steady and patient. It always seemed to rain when the truth tried to find me. Mara helped me sit up on the bed, careful with the IV line. My strength had come back just enough to move without feeling like my bones were made of glass. On the tray before me sat an old laptop she'd borrowed from the records department. No Wi-Fi, no login trace, nothing that could be tracked. She plugged the flash drive in and whispered, "Whatever's in there, it's from your mother's private office." The police never saw it. Victor made sure of that. The screen flickered to life. I saw folders, ordinary names, files labeled foundation reports, tax audits, family photos. It looked harmless, at least until I saw one at the bottom in bold letters. ED, Trust. I clicked it. A password prompt appeared. My chest tightened. "She used to use dates," I muttered. "Birthdays, anniversaries, little clues only family would know." I tried my birthday first. Nothing. Then hers. Still locked. Mara leaned over and said quietly, "What about the day she left Victor?" I typed the date I remembered from the diner, the night of the crash, the last night she ever smiled freely. The screen blinked once and opened. Inside were dozens of documents, financial ledgers, scanned contracts, offshore account statements. My mother's handwriting appeared in the margins, notes written in the same blue pen she used to sign Christmas cards. "Cross-check Cayman transfers," one read. Another said, "Forgery risk. Confirm signatures with notary." It didn't take long to understand. She'd found him out. Victor had been stealing from her charity for years, millions funneled through shell companies with names that sounded too clean to be real. Drayton Global Relief, Children's Promise Fund. All lies. Each transaction led to an offshore account in the Virgin Islands, then stopped cold 2 days before the crash. "She was going to expose him," Mara whispered. I nodded slowly. And he knew. The words hung heavy between us. The room felt colder. I scrolled further until I reached the last file. Rylan, MP3. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to click it. My hand hovered over the trackpad. Part of me wanted to hear her voice again more than anything. The other part was terrified of what she might say. Mara squeezed my arm. "You should." I pressed play. At first there was static. Then her voice. Soft, trembling, alive. "Sweetheart, if you're hearing this," I couldn't keep pretending. "I found out what he's been doing. He's dangerous, Rylan. He's not the man he shows the world." I froze. It was her. Every inflection, every breath. "I don't know how much longer I have before he realizes I've seen the files." I backed up everything, the trust papers, the offshore statements. "It's all tied to a clause. If something ever happens to me, it's you who can invoke it. Don't trust anyone at the firm, not even Phelps." Her breath hitched, a sharp sound of fear. "If I don't make it home, promise me you'll finish what I started. You'll know where to look. It's where the rain never reaches." Then silence. The recording cut off mid-word like someone had pulled the plug. For a long time I just sat there staring at the dark screen. My hands shook. Mara didn't speak. She didn't have to. The quiet between us was louder than any alarm. When I finally found my voice, it came out low and raw. "She knew he might kill her." Mara nodded slowly. "And she tried to protect you the only way she could." The hum of the hospital lights seemed to fade as I replayed her last words in my head. "Where the rain never reaches." It was something she used to say when I was a kid, whenever we hid letters in her office attic to keep them dry during storms. A small, safe corner above her desk, covered by a loose panel. I hadn't thought about it in years. "She was leaving me a message," I said quietly. "Something she left behind, hidden where he wouldn't think to look." Mara's gaze sharpened. "Then we need to go there." She was right. The next morning, after my discharge papers were signed, we left the hospital. Mara had borrowed a friend's old Ford, nothing that would draw attention. The city was just waking up, pale light breaking through gray clouds as we drove toward my mother's old law office downtown. The building sat on a corner lot, its brick walls streaked with years of rain. The firm's name had already been replaced. Victor made sure her name disappeared fast, but I still saw the faint outline of Elena D. Moore-esque etched above the door. We parked around back and slipped through the side entrance Mara had access to. She'd once worked temp shifts filing documents for the firm, which made it easier to get in without setting off alarms. Inside, the place smelled of dust and paper. The walls still carried faint traces of her perfume, vanilla and cedarwood. I found her office exactly as I remembered it, except for the empty bookshelves. The attic hatch was still there, hidden behind a coat rack. I climbed the small ladder carefully, the pain in my ribs flaring with each movement. Mara steadied the base, whispering, "Take it slow." I pushed open the panel. Dust fell in soft clouds. My flashlight swept across boxes, old case files, and a familiar wooden box tucked in the far corner. Its lid bore the same carved initials as the flash drive, EDM. Inside was a stack of sealed envelopes and a thin leather folder. The first envelope contained printed copies of the same files I'd seen on the drive. The second, a letter addressed to me in her handwriting. My vision blurred as I read, "Rylan, if you're reading this, it means the truth finally found its way back to you. Victor took everything, money, trust, even the story of how your father died. But he couldn't take your conscience. That's what he fears most. If I'm gone, the trust is still yours. Find the clause. It's buried deeper than money. It's justice." Mara placed a hand on my shoulder. She was building a case before she died. I nodded, my throat tight, and she hid it where he couldn't rewrite it. Below us, thunder rumbled faintly. It wasn't raining yet, but the storm was coming. I could feel it. I looked down at the flash drive, still clutched in my hand, at my mother's name etched beside the scratches. "He tried to erase her," I said quietly. "But she outsmarted him." Mara smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure he knows it." I placed the letter back in the box and closed the lid. The old wood creaked like it had been waiting all these years to be opened one last time. As we climbed down, I turned to Mara and said, "We need to find that clause she mentioned, the one only I can invoke. It's the key to everything." She met my eyes, steady and determined. "Then we start where it all began." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Soft, steady, familiar. The next morning, we drove to the old family estate, where the fire had started and the truth was buried. The next morning, the road to the old estate was quiet, wrapped in a fog that blurred the trees into gray silhouettes. Mara drove while I sat beside her, the documents from the hospital tucked inside my jacket. Neither of us spoke much. There wasn't anything left to say that could make what we were about to do easier. The house stood at the edge of the property like a wounded animal. Half its frame burned away, the rest blackened and brittle. The fire department had declared it unsafe months ago, but no one bothered to demolish it. Maybe even they felt the weight of what had happened here. When we stepped out of the car, the smell hit me first. Burnt cedar and ash. Rain had soaked through the ruins, but the air still carried that same faint tang of smoke, the one that had followed me through every nightmare since that night. "It still smells like that night," I said quietly. Mara adjusted her raincoat, eyes scanning the charred remains. "Then let's find what he wanted buried." We walked carefully across the muddy ground. The sky hung low, pressing against the hills like it, too, remembered. My mother had loved this place. She planted magnolias along the path and built a garden where the light hit just right in spring. Now the trees were gray, leaves turned to soot. The front door had collapsed inward, leaving a gaping wound where the foyer used to be. We climbed through the side, our flashlights cutting thin lines through the dark. Every step crunched over glass and splintered tile. I stopped beside what used to be her office. The outline of her desk was still there, just a blackened shape against the far wall. The ceiling had fallen in, revealing beams like ribs. I knelt, brushing away ashes, and something metallic caught the light. "Wait," I murmured. Beneath a layer of debris was a steel latch, burned but not melted. I tugged at it, the hinge groaning in protest. Mara crouched beside me, her gloved hands helping clear the rubble. Together we pulled back a warped section of flooring, revealing a square of reinforced metal. "Looks like a maintenance hatch," she said, squinting at the edges. "No," I whispered. "It's older. Mom had it built when Dad died. She called it her quiet room. Said it was for storing private records." The lock had melted into the hinge, but the metal beneath was thick, industrial. I found a crowbar among the wreckage and wedged it under the latch. It took both of us leaning in before the door gave way with a sharp metallic crack. A stale breath of air escaped from below, damp and cold. We aimed our flashlights into the darkness and saw a narrow staircase leading down. Mara hesitated. "You sure about this?" I nodded. If she left anything behind, it's down there. We descended one step at a time, the air thick with dust and mildew. At the bottom was a small room, half buried in ash but still standing. A metal cabinet leaned against one wall, its door warped but intact. Inside, several vacuum-sealed envelopes lay stacked in a row. Mara cut one open carefully. Inside were papers, clean, crisp, untouched by the fire. She handed me the first sheet, her expression tightening as she read over my shoulder. It was a legal revocation form. My mother's name, Elena D. Moore, signed in blue ink, the date stamped 3 days before her death. The document stripped Victor of all control over the family trust, transferring full authority back to her until further reassignment. My heart pounded. She tried to take it back. She was cutting him out. Mara scanned the rest, and she almost made it. These are notarized, filed under her firm's code. She must have hidden the originals down here before the crash. I leaned against the cabinet, the realization settling deep. All those years he'd paraded himself as the grieving widower, claiming control of her foundation for continuity, while the truth, her real decision, lay buried under the ashes he'd probably helped ignite. But as I flipped through the remaining papers, something felt off. The next envelope wasn't sealed like the others. It was taped hastily, as if added later. I tore it open. Inside was another document almost identical to the first, but this one reinstated Victor's authority, and at the bottom, my own name appeared beside his, marked as secondary signatory. Mara frowned. That doesn't make sense. Why would she add you to it? She wouldn't, I said, the words slow, heavy. Look at the signature. It was my handwriting, but not. The loops were too wide, the pressure too uneven. Victor had forged it. My stomach turned cold. He set me up. After she died, he must have faked this to make it look like I helped him reclaim the estate. If this ever got out, it'd frame me for fraud. Mara's voice dropped. Rylan, that means the moment we reveal these, he'll make you the fall guy. I closed the file, pressing my thumb against the edge until the paper creased. My mother had tried to save me, but even from the grave, his shadow still reached out. Above us, the wind shifted. A faint creak echoed through the ruined beams, like the house was breathing again. Mara swung her light toward the staircase. Did you hear that? I listened. The sound of rain had grown louder, pelting the broken windows above. Then, faintly, gravel crunching outside. Someone's here, I whispered. We gathered the documents quickly, sealing them back into one of the waterproof bags. I tucked it under my coat, heart hammering as we climbed the steps. The storm had grown heavy now, wind pushing through the cracks in the walls. When we reached the front yard, headlights cut through the rain, two beams slicing the mist in front of the driveway. A dark car idled at the gate, engine running. Mara's hand brushed against mine. You think it's him? I think he wants us to believe it is, I said, keeping my voice low. The lights brightened, sweeping across the charred ruins until they landed on us. I stepped slightly in front of her, gripping the bag tighter. The sound of the engine idled down to a hum, deliberate and patient. He's not going to bury me too, I murmured. Not this time. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out of the car, umbrella in hand, and smiled like he'd been waiting. The man under the umbrella stepped closer, the beam of his car's headlights spilling across the wet gravel. His uniform gleamed beneath the rain. Evening, he said, calm as a Sunday sermon. You two have been busy. Mara's fingers tightened around her coat pocket. I recognized him almost instantly. Officer Lang, the same name on the crash report that had twisted my life into a lie. The same man Victor's company had worked with for years. Lang tilted his head toward the papers under my arm. I heard you found something interesting out here. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I hesitated. The rain drummed against my jacket, each drop sharp and cold. They belong to my mother. We're taking them to the police. He gave a short laugh. You're looking at the police, son. Mara's voice was steady, but her pulse jumped in her throat. Then you won't mind escorting us there. Lang studied her, then nodded toward the car. Of course. Let's get you both out of this storm. It was after 11 p.m. when we reached the rural precinct, little more than a squat brick building with flickering lights and a single flag snapping in the wind. The drive had been silent, except for the wipers and the low murmur of Lang's radio. I watched the reflection of his badge in the window and wondered how many people had trusted that same shine before being silenced. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, pale and unforgiving. Lang led us to a small room, motioning for us to sit. "I'll have evidence control take a look," he said, collecting the waterproof bag from my hands. I forced a nod. "These documents prove my stepfather forged signatures, moved funds illegally." He raised a hand. "We'll handle it by the book." Mara and I exchanged a glance. I caught something in her expression. Not fear exactly, but calculation. Lang flipped through the papers slowly, his thumb brushing the seals, his eyes scanning the signatures. "Impressive work. Must have taken a lot to dig all this out of the ashes." "It took my mother's life," I said quietly. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the overhead vent. Then Lang smiled thinly and turned toward the shredder in the corner. "What are you doing?" I asked, standing halfway up. He fed the first page through. The motor whirred. Strips of paper fluttered into the bin like gray snow. "Officer, those are originals!" Mara's voice cracked. Lang looked over his shoulder. "You obtained them without a warrant. Chain of custody's compromised, inadmissible. Best thing to do is dispose before someone accuses me of tampering." I felt the room spin. "You're protecting him." He didn't deny it. He just shrugged. "You don't understand how this town works, son. Victor Moore funds our pensions, our patrol cars, the mayor's campaigns. He built Charlotte's skyline while you were still learning to drive." My jaw tightened. "He built it on lies." Lang slipped another page into the shredder, the sound loud and merciless. "That's business, not crime." Mara's hand brushed against mine under the table. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her gaze stayed locked on him. When the last page disappeared, Lang dusted his hands, almost satisfied. "There. Now there's nothing to get you hurt. My advice? Walk away. Start over somewhere quiet." "You think you can erase her?" I asked. "You think you can bury the truth again?" Lang's eyes hardened. "If you keep digging, you'll end up where your mother did." He motioned to two younger officers by the door. "See that they get home safe." Outside, the rain had turned into a downpour. We stood under the awning while one of the officers fetched our car from the side lot. The neon glow of the station's sign reflected off the puddles, casting the word "protect" in broken light. Neither of us spoke until we were back on the road. The silence was heavier than the storm. Imara drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He burned them all," I said finally. "Not all," she murmured. I turned to her. "What do you mean?" She kept her eyes on the road. "I knew he'd do it. Men like Lang don't ask for files, they ask for leverage. So before we left the estate, I scanned every page. For a second, I just stared. You copied them?" She nodded once. "Everything. And while he was pretending to process the evidence, I sent one file anonymously to a journalist in Raleigh. He owes me a favor." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating her face. Calm, focused, resolute, I exhaled slowly. "You thought of everything." "No," she said softly, "your mother did. She trusted the wrong people. I'm not making that mistake." We pulled into a small roadside motel, a faded sign that read "vacancy" flickering in the storm. The office clerk didn't look up from his magazine as we signed in. Inside the room, the wallpaper peeled and the heater clanked like an old truck, but it was quiet, safe enough for the night. I sat on the edge of the bed, soaked clothes clinging to my skin, staring at the rain-streaked window. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shredder chewing up my mother's signature, her handwriting disappearing into strips. Mara set her bag on the table, unzipped it, and slid a small USB drive toward me. "Everything's on this one. Encrypted, off-grid." I picked it up carefully, as if it might shatter. "You realize what this means, right? Victor won't just come after us. He'll come after anyone connected." She gave a small smile. "Then we make sure he has nowhere left to hide." For the first time in days, I felt something close to resolve, cold, steady, real. My mother had fought alone. I wouldn't, not anymore. Mara leaned back in the chair, her voice barely above the hum of the heater. "The journalist will publish it by morning. It'll start small, one article, one question. But once it's out, we can't take it back." I looked at her, then at the flash drive glinting under the lamplight. Good, I said. Let it burn. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon like a slow drumbeat. I didn't flinch this time, because for the first time, I wasn't running. I was fighting. The next morning, the story hit the headlines, and Victor's perfect world started to crack. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain and a TV anchor's voice echoing through the motel room. Mara stood by the screen, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Breaking news this morning, Victor Moore, founder of the Moore Foundation and longtime philanthropist, is under investigation for financial misconduct, the reporter announced. Behind her, the camera showed police cruisers parked at the gates of Victor's estate. My pulse quickened. There it was, his name, his empire. The mask finally cracking. The anchor continued. Documents leaked overnight point to several offshore accounts registered under subsidiaries linked to Mr. Moore. His representatives deny all wrongdoing. Then Victor's face appeared on screen, calm, polished, every word rehearsed. These baseless accusations come from a bitter young man seeking revenge, he said smoothly. Those who seek to destroy a good man will face consequences. Mara turned off the TV. He's cornered, but not down. I rubbed my eyes. The adrenaline that had carried me through the night had faded, leaving only exhaustion and a quiet rage simmering beneath it. He's still controlling the story, I said, but he's making me the villain. She nodded. That's what men like him do best. Rewrite the truth until it fits their hands. By noon, the storm outside had eased, but the media storm was only beginning. We sat in the car across from Victor's estate, watching a sea of reporters crowd the iron gates. Police lights flashed against the mansion's stone walls. The foundation's PR team stood outside, herding cameras, spinning damage control. My phone buzzed nonstop. Unknown numbers, voicemail alerts, messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some offered sympathy, others asked for comment. Mara leaned toward the windshield. Audit teams confirmed it. They've frozen several of his accounts, but he's already sending lawyers to the press. They're saying you faked the documents, that you wanted money. I almost laughed, but it came out hollow. A bitter son. He's been rehearsing that story for years. The words reminded me of my mother, how she'd kept quiet, how she'd smiled through humiliation. Not me, not anymore. We stayed there until the sun dipped low and the sky turned to steel. Reporters began shifting toward a mobile studio van set up near the main road. Victor was scheduled for a live interview at 7. He's going to use it, Mara said. He'll twist it again. He'll make himself the hero. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the small recorder, one of the few things left from my mother's office. My thumb brushed the worn button, and I remembered the night in the hospital when I'd woken to the sound of Victor's voice outside my room. Cold. Detached. Pull the plug, he'd said. He'd thought I was unconscious. He hadn't known the machines recorded everything. Now, that proof sat in my hand. At 6:55 p.m. the interview began. We watched from the motel room, the TV light flickering across the cracked walls. Victor sat under studio lights, perfectly composed, his gray suit immaculate. I've always believed in service, he said smoothly. My late wife, God rest her soul, shared that passion. To see her legacy dragged through the mud by those who claim to love her. It's tragic. I could almost hear Mara's teeth grind. He's pretending to grieve. Again. The anchor leaned forward. Mr. Moore, the leaked report suggests millions diverted from charitable accounts. Your name's on every authorization. Victor chuckled softly. Anyone can forge a document these days. My stepson has struggled with mental health since his mother's passing. I hope he gets the help he needs. Something in me went still. The calm before the strike. Mara looked at me. You ready? I nodded. She picked up the motel phone and dialed the station's public line. A producer answered. Charlotte News live call-in segment. Name? Doesn't matter, Mara said. He'll want to hear this. Seconds later, I heard my own voice broadcast through the TV's speaker. Mr. Moore, I said quietly, you said pull the plug, didn't you? The studio froze. Even through the screen, I could see the anchor's face pale. The cameraman glanced toward the control booth. Victor's smile twitched, just barely. I beg your pardon? I played the recording. His voice filled the room, sharp, cold, unmistakable. She's a liability now. Pull the plug. We'll call it a complication. Gasps rippled through the broadcast. The anchor's hand went to her earpiece, listening to frantic producers. Victor's jaw tightened, his polished calm unraveling by the second. "This is doctored," he barked. "This is defamation." But no one believed him. You could see it in the anchor's eyes, the quiet recognition that she'd just witnessed the end of something powerful. I ended the call. Silence lingered, long enough for the network to cut to commercial. Mara exhaled slowly. "It's over," she said. I shook my head. "No, it's only beginning." Outside, the rain started again, light but steady. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, somewhere near the estate. We watched through the motel window as police cruisers sped down the highway, their blue lights cutting through the night. The screen flashed back to the newsroom. "Breaking update," the anchor said, voice steady but tight. "Charlotte PD has issued a warrant for the arrest of Victor Moore, citing probable cause of financial and medical misconduct." I turned off the TV. The static faded into quiet. Mara sat beside me on the edge of the bed. Her voice softened. "You just ended him." I looked down at the recorder still in my hand, thumb tracing the edge. "No," I said. I ended the silence. We sat there for a long time, the world outside unraveling while the storm drummed softly against the glass. 2 days later, I stood outside the courthouse. Free, but not whole. 6 months passed before I realized what that really meant. Freedom wasn't the same as peace. The hearings had ended, Victor was in custody, and the papers had stopped calling. But silence has its own kind of noise, especially after you've spent years fighting to be heard. The lake outside Asheville shimmered beneath a late autumn sun, calm and almost too still. From the porch of the small house I'd rented, I could see my reflection ripple across the water. My mother used to say, "Lakes remember everything, they just keep it quiet." The boards creaked under my chair as I leaned back, a cup of black coffee cooling in my hand. The scars on my wrist had faded to faint lines, but they still caught the light when I moved. Sometimes I'd run my thumb across them just to remind myself that I'd survived. "It's too quiet," I murmured. A pair of ducks broke the silence, gliding toward the reeds. The world had gone back to turning without me. People in town nodded politely, but most didn't recognize me. I liked it that way. Inside on the table sat the letter Mara had sent from Oregon. She'd left Charlotte after the trial, said she needed a life without ghosts. She was opening a clinic working with families who couldn't afford care. The last line of her letter read, "You taught me something, Rylan. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about finally breathing." I smiled faintly, folded the letter, and tucked it back into its envelope. The house creaked with the wind. It was small, 2 rooms, a porch, and a view that didn't ask for much. I hadn't stepped foot in my mother's estate since inheriting it. The lawyers had called it a victory. I called it a tomb. The sound of tires crunching gravel pulled me from my thoughts. A beige sedan rolled up the drive. When the door opened, I recognized her instantly, Nurse Daniels. She looked the same, maybe a little older, with silver streaks softening her dark hair. "Well," she said, smiling gently, "you look a whole lot better than the last time I saw you." I chuckled. "That bar's not too high, is it?" She handed me a thermos. "Coffee, the real kind. Hospital stuff could never keep you awake back then." I poured her a cup and gestured toward the chair beside me. "How's the world treating you?" "Still standing," she said. "And you? I heard about the verdict. Must feel strange." "Strange is one word for it," I said quietly. "He's waiting on sentencing now. Attempted murder. Fraud. Everything he built is being picked apart by people in suits who once toasted his name." She looked out at the lake. "Your mother would have been proud." I stared into my coffee. Would she? I don't know. She always believed in redemption. I don't think I do anymore. The nurse smiled sadly. "You did what she couldn't. Survived him. Sometimes that's enough." We sat for a while watching the light dance across the water. There wasn't much left to say. Sometimes peace doesn't come from answers. It comes from the quiet between them. As afternoon turned to gold, I excused myself and walked down to the dock. The boards groaned under my feet, the same way they used to when I was a kid sneaking down here past curfew. I carried my mother's old journal, the leather cover worn soft by her hands. The last page read, "If you ever hear silence, fill it with truth." I traced the words with my finger. The ink faded, but strong. The wind lifted gently off the lake, brushing against my face. "I did, Mom," I whispered. The water rippled, a small sound against the dock, like an answer. For a long moment, I stood there, breathing in the cool air, feeling something ease inside me that I hadn't known was still tight. By dusk, the nurse had gone. I locked up the house and gathered the last thing left on the table, a small box of files, the originals, the documents that had brought everything to light. I carried them down the gravel road to the old post office and slid the box into the outgoing mail chute. The label read, "More Foundation for Victims Advocacy." My mother's name was printed on the top line. As I walked back, the sky blazed orange and pink, fading into the kind of blue that only exists before night takes over. I stopped once, looking at the horizon, and smiled, not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that finally lets it go. "She gave me life twice," I said softly. "Now I'll spend it right." The wind off the lake stirred again, rustling the trees, carrying a faint echo, almost like her laugh. The machine stopped once, but her voice never did.